We've all been there, right? You run into someone you haven't seen in years, or you just look back at an old photo and think, I'm not the same person I was then.
Yeah, a totally universal feeling.
It is, but hidden inside that, that casual little thought, the difference between being the same and just being similar, well, it's a philosophical bomb, really. It's ready to blow up our whole concept of who we are.
It really is.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into some fascinating source material. It's this brilliant, really compact philosophical dialogue about a character called Hankman, and it blends this everyday kind of banter with some seriously deep questions.
Using humor to get at some very heavy ideas.
Exactly. Our mission is to unpack the weight of those two little words, sameness versus similarity, and see what happens to our sense of self when identity turns out to be maybe just a convenient fiction. Okay, let's unpack this.
That dialogue is such a great shortcut. I mean, it gets you to hundreds of years of philosophical skepticism in just a few lines. It forces you, the listener, to immediately confront this assumption we all carry around.
That there's a continuous me under it all.
A stable self.
Yeah.
But if we're constantly changing new cells, new memories, new opinions, I mean, the data is never the same from one day to the next. So what criteria are we even using to say we're the same person?
We just rely on persistence, I guess. We assume the person we talked to yesterday is the same one here today.
Precisely. And that's the core puzzle Hankman introduces. Is identity something, I don't know, internal, like a soul? Or is it just a useful word we invented to make society work? That's the engine of this whole deep dive.
And the conversation starts with such a classic kind of awkward social moment. Hankman's friend just says, "Hey, Hankman, somehow you don't seem to be the same anymore."
And Hankman's reply is the perfect philosophical pivot. He doesn't get offended. He says, I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
But then he adds the key part.
Right. He says, and I'm actually glad I still look similar to myself.
Boom. There it is.
So he accepts he's changed, that he isn't the same, but he affirms he's still similar to his old self.
We should probably zero in on the technical terms the source uses here because the precision really matters.
It does. He separates sameness, or Selbigkeit, which implies this absolute, unchanging substance over time.
From similarity, or Ähnlichkeit, which is all about relationships and context.
Think of it this way. You can only be similar to who you were 5 years ago. You can't actually be the same, because that would mean nothing has changed at all. Physically, mentally, nothing.
And life just doesn't work that way. So sameness, in that strict sense, is impossible.
It's impossible, which is a huge shift. If absolute sameness isn't even on the table, then the word identity, as we use it, well, it's already in trouble.
It's already compromised.
It is. And to really hammer this point home, Hankman immediately jumps into thought experiments. He gives 3 scenarios that, from the outside, look identical.
But inside, they're fundamentally different. Right. He asked his friend, it's not impossible that you're currently dealing with an unknown twin of mine. Or maybe I've been replaced by a clone. Or worse yet, by a robot that behaves almost exactly like the original.
He just brings the existential dread right there to the coffee table. What's fascinating here is how he uses this classic clone problem to just tear apart the whole idea of personal identity.
Exactly. In all 3 cases, the twin, the clone, the robot, the similarity is there. They look like Hankman, they talk like Hankman.
They function as Hankman.
But sameness, that's gone. It's
Right.
impossible. The original is gone. So the takeaway for the person observing is pretty stark. You can't rely on external stuff, how someone looks or acts, to verify their absolute identity.
But then it takes this wonderfully practical, almost funny turn. Because if this similarity is perfect, if you literally can't tell the difference, why should you care?
Hankman points out how absurd it is to worry about it. If the person across from you is functionally identical to the one you expected, he basically asks, why should you care?
And then he has that great line, "Personally, I wouldn't care if you were a robot. I'm very open-minded in that regard."
Which, that immediately brings up the Turing test, doesn't it? If identity is judged only on behavior, if a robot can fool you, then what it's made of becomes irrelevant.
As long as it performs the function of Hankman, then for all practical purposes, it is Hankman.
To the outside world, yes, it's a profound shift. It moves the whole question from what am I made of to what do I do?
So if our external criteria are flawed, maybe we should just stop trying to look inside the box and just judge what the box delivers.
And that functional view connects directly to some of the deepest skeptical traditions in philosophy. This idea, it leads right to the conclusion that identity isn't a real thing, but an abstraction.
Okay, so let's start with John Locke. He had one of the most famous attempts to kind of anchor the self, right?
Right. Locke tried to save identity by grounding it in psychological continuity. He argued that personal identity is based on the continuity of consciousness,
Yeah.
on memory.
If I remember doing it, then I'm the same person who did it. The consciousness persists, not necessarily the physical stuff.
It was a radical idea for his time. But wait, then the Hankman clone problem it completely destroys Locke's theory, doesn't it?
It seems to, because if the clone has every single one of Hankman's memories, but it isn't the same physical person, the definition just starts to crumble. The memory pattern is continuous, but the original Hankman is gone.
Exactly. Locke assumed that the consciousness needed a unique substrate, a unique person to exist in. The Hankman clone shows you can just copy the pattern. The memories are just data, not the identity itself. And that realization takes us straight to David Hume.
Ah, Hume, the great destroyer of the stable self.
He is. Hume's bundle theory argues that the self is nothing but a bundle of impressions, a fleeting collection of sensations and thoughts. He said if you try to look inside yourself for a self, you never find it.
You only find the perceptions.
The mind is just a stage, but there's no single entity watching the play. And the Hankman dialogue just perfectly echoes this, is that line.
You have no identity with yourself, and none with anything else, and yet people talk about it.
The word exists, but the thing it's supposed to describe, that enduring identical substance, it's just not there.
And I love that concept of the identical dice. It's so good. The dialogue says identity is purely abstract, like imagining two identical dice, but that has nothing to do with reality. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It's a brilliant analogy. In math, you can have two perfectly identical things. But in the real world, no two dice are ever truly identical. There are always tiny differences.
So that perfect sameness, that identity, it only exists as an idea. The physical world only ever gives you degrees of similarity.
Which means the only practical job for the word identity is just to distinguish one person from another, like a social security number.
Yeah.
It's not about defining who you are to yourself over time.
And that idea that the unique self kind of dissolves brings us to a more modern philosopher, Derek Parfit.
Right? The source material draws that connection. Parfit really pushes this idea that the importance of identity dissolves completely once you accept that duplication is possible.
So for Parfit, if you can be cloned or teleported, the idea of a single, unique me just stops being that important.
Exactly. For Parfit and for Hankman, what matters is not identity, but psychological continuity and connectedness. If the pattern of your mind continues, even in a new body, then the things that matter, your goals, your relationships, they also continue.
The vessel, the I, becomes secondary.
But wait, if identity is just a functional thing, doesn't that remove all ethical responsibility? If I'm not the same person who took out that loan last year, why should I have to pay it back?
That's the core challenge, isn't it? The law and society absolutely insist on identity for accountability, even if philosophy says it doesn't strictly exist.
We have to maintain the shared fiction of continuity for society to work. So the philosophical self might be fleeting, but the social self is tracked relentlessly.
Which shifts the whole debate. Who's the real judge of your identity? Your own inner feeling, or the society that's reacting to you?
The social environment is incredibly powerful. The source brings up Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
Oh, right. Gregor Samsa wakes up as a giant insect, but inside he still feels like Gregor. His consciousness is continuous.
But his identity crisis isn't internal. It's driven by the fact that society, his own family, completely rejects his new form. They won't recognize the person inside the shell.
So the external world defines who he's allowed to be. His internal feeling doesn't matter.
And that uncertainty is a huge theme in dystopian fiction. Think of Philip K. Dick and the Blade Runner films.
Are you human or are you a replicant?
Exactly. The whole question becomes ethically charged. If a replicant acts, remembers, and feels just like a human, what's the meaningful difference? It shifts from, are you human, to, do you function as a human?
Which brings us back to Hankman's line, I wouldn't care if you were a robot.
It's that same relativization. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this whole debate is playing out right now with our technology.
Deepfakes, AI, voice cloning, it's the modern Hankman paradox.
It is. They create perfect similarity and completely undermine our trust in what we see and hear. The philosophical fear that your identity can be copied is now a technological reality. We can't trust our own senses anymore.
And the dialogue just leans into that uncertainty right to the very end. The final exchange is this brilliant bit of existential humor.
Hankman's friend is just defeated. He's given up. And he asks the only practical question left.
So who are you now? The robot.
And Hankman's reply is just perfect absurdity. How should I know? You don't know either.
The ultimate admission of ignorance. The problem can't be solved.
And that ending just seals it. Identity isn't a truth we discover, it's a shared fiction. A story we agree to tell each other because it's useful.
We rely on that mutual agreement to keep the illusion of a stable self going. So what does this all mean for you, the learner?
I think the key takeaway from the Hankman paradox is that we have to see the difference between the philosophical self and the functional self. Identity isn't this unchanging thing, it's an evolving story.
It's a word we use for orientation.
Right. We live as if we had a stable identity, mostly because the world demands it of us.
You know, it reminds me of Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being. He talks about identity being light because it's a fiction, a mask. It doesn't have that absolute heavy substance.
That's a great connection.
And the final provocative thought to leave you with is this. Does identity only gain weight, only become serious, when we're forced to prove it against a counterclaim? When Hankman gets asked, "Who are you now?" that's the moment the fiction becomes really important.
So consider this. Do you define your own evolving identity? Or is the main framework for who you are just projected onto you and enforced by your social, your professional, and increasingly your digital world?